start recording. And
You get me started.
switch you over here and make sure that is not the one I want. This is the one I want.
Okay.
So now,
That's it's already up.
yep, that's the one that's up. And then that's your preview for what's coming
Okay.
up. Yep,
And that's mine right here.
yep, left and right.
Yeah.
So we're just, what both Rob and I, have been close friends with Marshall for a long time, and we just wanted to do a little bit. There were a few other people that wanted to come in and talk a little bit, but they just couldn't make it with their schedule. So you've got us. We'll have a little, just some light refreshments and things afterwards out there that we can mingle and just talk about other things too. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Rob. And also, we're recording this for YouTube, so we'll be posting the link to YouTube tomorrow on our website. So you'll be able to go into YouTube and watch the recordings of it. So, hey, Rob.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening. Thank you for coming. It's a privilege to be able to say a few words about my good friend Marshall Goodman and his contributions to the field of ceramic history. I grew up in the Richmond antique scene as well. My mother was an antique dealer. And the name Marshall Goodman at that time was legendary. He was known for always finding the best objects and for always outbidding his competition at auction. In 1979, long before I had met Marshall, I bought this 18th century plate at the bottom of the progression here on the right at his shop, Distinctive Consignments. It was this plate, Marshall, that launched my investigation into the subject of English shell edge. If anybody knows my scholarship, this has been my life's pursuit. And that first plate came from Marshall. And I have not been able to duplicate such a plate ever since that time. And Marshall's never heard this story before, so thank you for that. Many of us may remember Marshall's shop on Cary Street. All sorts of treasures, floor to ceiling, and then some. They were everywhere. The problem was the best things never were for sale. Marshall finally sold me something around 1995. It was his early Baltimore stoneware picture. And I think he's regretted it ever since. But we have been friends since that time. Much of our friendship has revolved around the topic with our common interest in early Virginia ceramics, especially the story of the elusive factory of Benjamin Duval in Richmond. In 2002, on a cold day, construction had begun and uncovered the remains of that stoneware factory at the 23rd and Main Street location. We had no help from the preservation community to speak of, and Marshall was the first one to answer the call to help salvage what we could from that site. In a one-week period, we retrieved thousands of fragments, including marked examples of the B. Duval and Company. Much of the time we spent chasing construction trucks to the dump. Marshall, wearing his Italian loafers, became the foreman for the makeshift archaeological team. We even retrieved fragments of the Duval kiln out of these dump trucks, and ultimately all of these have found a home in the state's archaeological repository. Most importantly, Marshall and I analyzed the thousands of fragments to produce an important article published in the 2005 volume of Ceramics in America. And I will say, even though I'm a co-author of this stands the test of time as one of the most comprehensive and quickest studies of archaeological fragments from such early Southern pottery. Now, we used a lot of these fragments to help to begin to attribute a number of unmarked specimens to Duval's circa 1811, 1818 factory. And along that line too, trying to capitalize on it a bit, we began to acquire some of these significant objects, such as this picture now in the collection of Colonial Williamsburg's Art Museum. And this started a much larger journey into other early Richmond potters who had been neglected or never identified. This single object, which Marshall came across, is marked Richmond on the base here, and this served as their Rosetta Stone for the attribution of other what then became known as the James River Stoneware Schools, that's the standard term we use today. In 2005, Marshall came up with the idea, the concept. He said, let's have a museum exhibition to present all these great findings. And I said, that's great, Marshall. Who's going to do that? He said, so you are. But Marshall laid the groundwork with the Virginia Historical Society to make this happen. Marshall has been so much of a catalyst for all of these things. Very quietly, he has instigated so much of this research that I don't know if he's, one day he'll get the full credit for that, but he's been an amazing catalyst. And Marshall approached the Virginia Historical Society to organize this groundbreaking show with our colleague Kurt Russ, and it was at the time called Stoneware of Eastern Virginia. And it also included, we were able to produce a beautifully illustrated article in Antiques magazine for the first time bringing to the world this Southern pottery tradition. And since that time, the stoneware products of the James River region, have become perhaps the best documented of all American stoneware regions. And that's quite a feat, and much of that goes back to Marshall's signed Richmond yard and his persistence in following these things. Now, for example, this is an archaeological fragment from Henrico County's Thomas Amos site, who was a Baltimore potter transplanted to Henrico County around 1818, and Marshall was able to find this antique, intact example, which now resides in their collection. One of Richmond's and Virginia's most prolific stoneware potters was John P. Schermerhorn. Kurt Russ is responsible for much of what we know about Schermerhorn with his articles and with his research in his articles. This rare marked example was retrieved on a late night journey with Marshall, and which we can tell that story at the break. We can't tell it tonight, but it now also resides in Colonial Williamsburg. It's one of the very few rare marked examples. With the combined research interest of Kurt Russ and a PhD dissertation by William and Mary's Oliver Mueller Herbeck, we launched another major exhibition at Mesder, Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, around 2012, which again was a sort of a landmark watershed time. The exhibition brought together sort of the Mount Rushmore of Southern ceramic scholars, including Jeff Evans and Brad Reichenberg here. Quietly we did this, but quite an event for Richmond ceramic history. Other public forums began to spring up, including a full-day seminar held here at Jeffrey Evans, which include a rare public speaking engagement by Marshall. That was quite a treat to hear Marshall's own words about some of these things. Now, beyond history, one of the most important outcomes of the research was the recognition of the artistic breadth of John P. Schermerhorn's output. Never in a million years did many of us expect to see a federal eagle. Let me go back to that one. A federal eagle and a graceful heron on the Richmond stonewares. We never would have considered that, but indeed they were. And his decorating prowess may be best expressed in this wonderful jar, which Marshall always affectionately called the Roadrunner jar. That's one of our glitches, okay? I could write a book on my many ceramic adventures with Marshall. This is a typical example. 8 o'clock at night, Marshall calls. Rob, I'm headed your way. He lives in Richmond, I live in Williamsburg. Marshall, I'm in bed. Marshall, well, get your butt out of bed. 45 minutes later, at a McDonald's halfway between Richmond and Williamsburg, Marshall presents this unbelievable example of James River Valley stoneware. Now, it's a wonderful feeling, and not many of us had this feeling, to have a pot look right back at you straight in the eyes. But who is this man? A quick comparison of the eyebrows on the oil portrait of John P. Schimmelhorn suggests that the figure on the jar is one and the same. This jar now resides in the William C. and Susan S. Merida Foundation's collection, and it's just an incredible example of a relic of Schimmelhorn's output with his own portrait on it. Archaeology has also played a role in the research of Schimmelhorn's ceramics. Destroyed by construction, Marshall again was one of the first to help Oliver recover a collection of fragments from the property. These fragments have been used to attribute many Schimmelhorn pots, but note that this remarkable 20-gallon stoneware keg speaks for itself, bearing John P. Schimmelhorn's own signature. It's the only signed piece with script signature by Schimmelhorn. Another prolific potter was Stephen Sweeney, who worked in Lower Henrico County. The iconic Sweeney decoration are those open clouds, which they really appear everywhere, but for years no one knew where they came from. Although he also made some incredibly graphically incised pieces. This is incised fish, which was recovered from the site, actually bears Stephen Sweeney's script signature. It's a remarkable artifact. The Sweeney site, fortunately, is still well preserved on a wooded hillside with acres of waster fragments. And for this exercise here, we actually got Marshall out of his Italian loafers. I think he actually put some boots on. It's a very, very rugged exercise. Our friend Charles Lewis literally threw himself into the work. And if you can imagine 3 or 4 acres of wasters that are 2 and 3, 4 feet deep in places, it is a remarkable repository of material. Most of us know this, most southern ceramic transactions take place in parking lots across the South, usually in fast food joints or perhaps at rest stops. Here, Marshall is sharing with us the important discovery of that Sweeney fragment with Jeff and Michelle Erickson in the parking lot of Colonial Williamsburg. Even though all the academic stuff was going on inside the museum, the real action was out here in the parking lot with Marshall. Perhaps Virginia's most recognizable stoneware potter was Henry Lowndes of Petersburg, known for his use of applied eagles and star decorations. Marshall has owned or handled all of the major examples at this point. It's a remarkable, it's hard to believe how many of these have passed through Marshall's hand. The fact that this picture remains in his collection is a testament to the importance and personal meaning to Marshall. And without question, this picture is among the finest American stoneware objects in existence. In 2006, Marshall helped organize an initiative. Now, after a few years of archaeological training, Marshall's out there now organizing archaeological feats. But he organized this archaeological survey of the site of the Lowndes pottery, which is still in a vacant lot in Petersburg. That survey produced a large sample of stoneware wasters. And it's amazing how many jugs were produced at Lowndes pottery, but yet none of these seem to survive it as antiques. Most importantly, though, the survey confirmed the presence of intact kiln foundations. So this was all important to kicking the can down the road, understanding the Lowndes pottery. But Marshall went further and convinced the city of Petersburg that they had to buy the vacant lot and hopefully protect the site from destruction, as we have seen happen to these other stoneware potteries. And so Marshall was here working as a historic preservationist, actually encouraging the city municipality to buy these vacant lots for this Lowndes pottery. And that's an incredible feat, Marshall, and you really need to be recognized for that. Another Richmond stoneware story is told by the extensive products of another Baltimore transplant, David Parr. Of particular note is this massive 20-gallon water cooler. It was brought to our attention by Kurt Rust, who has written about it in Ceramics in America. This amazing object was the centerpiece of our show at the Virginia Historical Society. and it's fortunately still in the possession of the Virginia Historical Society. Now, the site of the Par Factory in downtown Richmond is somewhat still preserved, with tons and tons of stoneware wasters. Again, with Marshall's help, we again organized a short duration archaeological survey of a sample of these fragments. And among the wasters was evidence of large water coolers of the size of the Great Eagle cooler we just saw. One lesson we took away from that little testing: the vast majority of Parr stoneware were undecorated, and out of the maybe 3,000 sherds, only one was marked with the David Parr, the Kesey and Parr mark. So the vast majority of these wares were produced without any marks whatsoever. And this is an example of an antique example which has survived with the Kesey and Parr Richmond mark. In 2023, Kurt Russ, myself, Marshall, and Oliver published the remarkable 19th century stoneware of Virginia, Lower James River Valley and ceramics in America, summarizing over this 10 to 15 years of research. It's an amazing how we were able to, with the people involved in Marshall's knowledge, we were able to summarize something that before that no one actually had paid a bit of attention to. It is impossible to fully appreciate Marshall's contributions to numerous museums and private collections. This wonderful George Fulton harvest jug, although it's utilitarian, would be at home at any art museum in the world. And Marshall has this unique ability to recognize that immediately when he sees an object. There's so much one could just talk about the aesthetics of this object, not to mention its historical meaning. It is fair to say that the Marshall approach to antique dealing is still with elements of intrigue worthy of an international secret agent. Many stories may never be told. Many stories shouldn't be told. But one lesson that I have hopefully learned from Marshall is his insistence and persistence. When this extremely rare and expensive New York porcelain vase came up for sale, I said to Marshall, "What's our limit? And who are we going to sell it to?" Without hesitation, Marshall said, "Just buy the damn thing." And that is something if I've learned anything from Marshall, it's that mantra. And I hope many of you take that to heart in the auction this next couple of days. If you like it, just buy the damn thing. Now, Marshall's creative imagination extends to all sorts of things, including these German stoneware decanters made for a Kentucky bourbon distiller. Another great example of American ceramic art that has passed through Marshall's hands is this Anthony Baca sugar bowl, now in an important Chicago collection. In case you missed this one, there's still a wonderful example in Marshall's personal collection in this auction this weekend. And long before current scholarship brought them to the forefront, Marshall insisted that we buy this Edgefield Face Special. And it became the first example to enter the Mazda collection in Winston-Salem. It's probably one of the most aesthetically pleasing is not the right word, intricate. Again, Marshall would have the right word for it, but it's a very graphic object. It was an amazing sight to see this jar among the tables of, let me back up. It was a cold December day. Marshall called me to say, "Rob, there's a stoneware crock coming up for sale. It's in size Yorktown, 1781. I said to Marshall, "No such things exist." There was no pottery in Yorktown 1781, and the 1781 was the commemorative date of the Battle of Yorktown. So it must be a centennial object, maybe made in 1876 to commemorate Yorktown for some reason. But Marshall was insistent, so we took the trip up to a small firehouse on a New Year's Day to look at this object. And there it was among tables still with household bric-a-brac. Most were box lots that would bring no more than $5 at best. And sure enough, it was there and it says 1781. So for me, there was something immediately familiar about it. I didn't know what until I thought about it. It was not made in 1781, but I was able to recognize the slip trailing as a product of Baltimore, typically used in the 1820s. But why were Baltimore's commemorating the 1781 Battle of Yorktown? Again, that didn't make a lot of sense either until I realized in 1824, the Marquis de Lafayette made an extended visit to Baltimore during his year-long tour of America. And certainly that pot was produced for his visit. And the mom and pop crowd at the auction was stunned at the price ultimately that this brought at auction. What did we lose?
The picture.
It's here.
Yeah, you got it.
You don't have a bulb problem, eh?
Okay, let's see here. Are we getting anything? Okay, we're not getting anything there.
Anything?
Nope. Let me. Okay, I'm gonna have to turn the light on here for a second.
All right. I'm almost done.
It's still shining, still burning.
Did I have something up here?
That's a toggle camera. That's not it. Oops. Let me try turning this off and turn it back on.
All right.
What'd you do?
I didn't do anything.
Well, do it again next time it happens.
Yeah. Where we? Okay. So anyway, this particular jar made for Lafayette's visit to Baltimore certainly places it at the zenith, I think, of American stoneware objects. And the fact, of course, the American Revolution was decided at Yorktown. It's just an incredible object. Again, it now resides in Mesder with the William and Susan Mariner collection. So in this very short time, we have just seen a few of Marshall's contributions to the ceramics field. There's so much more I could bring in. And again, I want to emphasize, beyond the historical significance of his contributions, it is Marshall's ability to recognize the art and beauty of the ceramic medium in a way that few can. He just has this Washington, D.C. Jar on the left of the sunflowers, to me, just is, again, is one of the most beautiful American ceramic stonewares I've ever seen. And it's at Colonial Williamsburg now as well. But just a remarkable ability and eye to see beauty in these things that a lot of people just overlook or they just don't emphasize. With that said, every museum curator in this country could take a lesson from his eye and also Marshall's sense of fashion. He always is a sharp-dressed man wherever he goes, and I appreciate that. And if I had to summarize Marshall in a single word, it was a word that Marshall often uses. You can hear him mutter to himself when he's looking at something, and that word is remarkable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. It's hard to put everything down in a short period of time like that.
It's impossible. There's two things that's going on real quick. I will say we have an annual ceramic conference that goes back and forth between Mesder and Colonial Williamsburg. Already funds have been raised, Marshall, to have an annual Marshall Goodman lecture devoted to you to be presented at these conferences, recognizing your contribution.
honored as being auctioneer.
Well, that's why you never get out of your chair.
They fall down.
Once you're in it, you're in there for life. Good.
Oh, golly. Okay, let's see if I can get this thing flipped over here without. Okay, and now I'm going to pick. Come on. There it is. Okay, take that. And then I will go down here and do this. Yay! I did it. Wow. Okay. I'll put this up. I don't really need it, but I am going to give you a little short tour of Marshall's house and his parents' house, and talk about them a little bit, and then talk about his contributions to Shenandoah Valley decorative arts and folk art, which is what I know. So without further ado, again, the sharp-dressed man. I had to crop the other person that was in this photo out. Protect the innocent. Okay, here's Marshall's house where all these things were. This house his father built, and as a copy of a Connecticut house. It was featured in the 1986 Better Homes and Gardens Country Home magazine, which is where these photos come out of, and where the photos in the catalog, in the print catalog, came out of. Some of those. And it was a very, very nice write-up on his mother and father's collection. And you'll notice some of the things here are in this. These photos are in the sale, and some of them Marshall added obviously later. But so this is in Midlothian, Virginia. Here's the. I guess this is what room did y'all call this, Marshall? What was this room called? The dining room? Okay. So here we have the dining room. Marshall's father did all the woodwork in the house, all those cabinets and all those things. And actually, I've found some of the sketches of where he sketched this stuff out that I'm laying aside to give back to y'all. But you know, he was a remarkable craftsman, and he also made all of the tin lighting that we'll see as we go through here. And the window treatments and things and the upholstery and things his mother did. And she also designed and made clothing, some very stylistic things from the 60s and 70s, which we have some of those things to sell in our October auction. Some really, really elegant mid-modern clothing that we'll be selling in that sale. So watch the October sale for that. But it was just, this was the library. Needless to say, it didn't look like this when we started cleaning things out. Marshall had totally filled this room with books, and shelves could not hold everything, so there were books everywhere, along with other stuff everywhere. But I felt right at home, because if anybody's been in my office, they'll see that same thing: books piled on the floors, and you turn around and you knock a book off. And every time I would go to visit Marshall, he'd have something in his room he wanted to show me. Would be stepping over top of books, and I said, "Marshall, be careful, don't fall." And he'd go right across, just like he's been doing it every day of his life. And of course, I was stumbling through things. But this is, and of course, you'll notice the tin chandelier there his father made. You'll notice that double arm toll light there in the underneath the ship painting, and he did some amazing things with the on-off switches. So it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to incorporate an on-off switch with colonial lighting, okay? Because they just didn't exist. So the candle snuffers that sit on the sides of the columns of these things that would hook there, That was the on-off switch. So you'd pull it, the light would go on, light would go off. Ingenious, absolutely ingenious. And I think Marshall said that he had actually had a patent for that type of switch. So yeah, just and the his tin shop was in the garage. So back the photo we saw to begin with, that the garage to the left wasn't really a garage; it was a tin shop. So and all his tin stuff is still there. So you know, just a remarkable man. Here's the I guess the great room. That would have been another dining room, but this was long, the full depth of the house. And again, his mother did all the painting and the stenciling and all that work that you see here, all the window treatments, and you obviously notice many things in the sale that are in this setting, including rugs. Here's the basement, and wonderful yellow pine paneling everywhere, and some built-in cupboards and things there on the left, and there's sliding the window you see there to the left that had a sliding panel that went across the windows because the window was ground level, so big sliding panels that closed that off. So just every attention to detail that you could think of was in this house. And you see one of the bedrooms upstairs there too. So Marshall started, the family, and Marshall and his two sisters who are here this evening too, and their husbands. They would go antiquing, and they didn't always enjoy it. Matter of fact, it was kind of a thing they felt like they were being drug along places, and Marshall often got into trouble and got thrown out of shops and things because he was diddling something or whatever, and but that's where he kind of got his introduction to antiques, as well as living with them. So they would go to shows and things, and he also did a lot of things with his aunt, who was Bobby Crawford's mother, and Bobby and Marshall are cousins, and that's kind of how they got into being in business together for a while. So it just kind of came naturally, but he always had that eye, even growing up with these traditional antiques. I mean, this is an antiquarian collection. There's the New England and Connecticut highboys, and there's the New Hampshire chest and tambour desk and things, and then along with a nice mix of southern things in too. So this was back in the day when people would collect. We'd kind of collect across the board, and you notice all the candlesticks out there that were collected, and Marshall collected some of those also. He had a great eye for candlesticks. So this was really a classic antiquarian collection that they had put together from a lot of the top dealers, the Toulouse, the pair of paintings over there, and just we found receipts for a lot of these things. Dick Whittington auctions in New Hampshire, and so they were really going around buying things that struck their eye. But Marshall really got interested in the regional things not only made in his area, the Richmond area, which has got some great pieces like the set of Petersburg chairs out there, and some other great pieces, lots of great Virginia things. But he got especially interested in the Shenandoah Valley, and in 1971. There was a book that came out that's actually in one of these stacks of books here, Old Homes of Page County, and that was published by the Mr. Locke, who was the editor of the paper over there. And Marshall got a hold of this book, and of course, as you're going through it, it shows the exteriors, but it also shows the interiors and all these great objects and things. So he decides, I need to go to Page County. So he started going to Page County and just kind of nosing around, knocking on some doors and things, and he talked to the gentleman who published the book, and people were aware of the decorated furniture coming out of Page County. I'm sorry for this horrible photo, but and of course Johannes Spittler. People were aware of those. Not everybody. A few people were aware of this furniture that was coming out of Page County decorated. No one knew the artist at that time. It wasn't until later when Don Walters discovered who the artist was. But Marshall quickly, said, there's got to be a lot of that stuff there. So he started turning things up. So one of the first pieces, and maybe the first piece,
So the clock on the right is the clock that's at Colonial Williamsburg. Well, all these pieces are at Colonial Williamsburg. I pulled this off their website. That's why it's so bad, because it came from the website, not because they took it. The clock on the right, that one had been in the Woodstock Museum for many years. You had to pay a quarter to go in and see it, and it was supposedly it was the clock that had been brought over from Germany, but quickly it was recognized as being a Spittler. Well, not quickly, but after a while, and Dan Berner had something to do with that. The top chest, that's the what's known as the Gander chest that came out of the Gander family in Page County. And Marshall and Bobby discovered that and bought that from Mr. Gander. The bottom chest is another one that CW has that actually came out of the Roanoke area. Two sisters had that, but so Marshall had something to do with the Gander chest there on the top. They sold that to Dr. Direly when Dr. Direly was putting together a great Shenandoah Valley collection. A lot of the things, I'm sure, if you look at Dr. Direly's catalog, you'll see Bobby Crawford's name on a lot of things and Marshall's things on a lot of things, and I can tell you everything that has Bobby Crawford's name, Marshall had fingerprints on. So, I believe the first chest that they found was the little one on top. That's just a small little diminutive chest, and they actually got that from Mr. Locke, the editor. That had come down in his family in Page County, and it's just a small little chest with little spool feet. So they immediately took that to Dr. Direly and sold that to Dr. Direly. So that was Dr. Direly's first Spittler piece. Well, not too long after that, they turned up the Gander chest. And again, once word started going around that there were these two guys that were paying a lot of money for pieces of furniture, they paid at the time, they paid Mr. Gander $75,000 for that chest, and that was back in the early 70s. So that was a boatload of money then. So it wasn't like they were stealing these things. Now, of course, they brought a lot more later, but that was many years later. So they found the Gander chest. They took that to Dr. Direly, thinking that he would say, "Oh, good, I can have one on top of the other," because they really fit perfect. But Henry was a very frugal man. Even though there was plenty of money there, and he was putting a great collection together, he only needed one Spittler chest. So he bought the Spittler, the Gander chest, sold the other one back to Marshall, the one on the top there, back to Marshall, and Marshall sold that one into Dr. Wright in Richmond. When Dr. Wright then started breaking up his collection, I guess it was 15 years ago probably, Marshall called me and he said, "You need a Spittler chest." I said, "Yeah, I do, Marshall, but I can't afford a Spittler chest." It was probably 20 years ago. We've had it forever. And he said, "Yes, you can." He said, "Come down and see it." So we went down and saw it and fell in love with it. And he priced it at what he had sold it to Dr. Wright for. And he said, "You just take time to pay me." I said, "Wow." I said, "That's great." So anyway, so that's how we got our first Spittler piece. So that was great. The chest on the bottom, and that's being taken out of the back of Marshall's vehicle. That's the one that Will talks about in his essay, his wonderful essay in the first at the beginning of the catalog. And this one turned up at a Thursday night sale down in Richmond, middle of the summer. I think it was August or something, and the sale was on Auction Zip, but this was on page 35 of the photos, and Auction Zip only put up 30 pages, so most people hadn't seen it. And I got tipped off about it, and Marshall got tipped off about it, and of course then we partnered together on it because really there wasn't anybody else that knew about it. So, but anyway, that's we bought this together. That I bought Marshall out for this one, and we've since put feet on it. So this is these two set at the bottom of our bed in the bedroom at the Sites house, and we have to keep blankets on it because it's where the cats love to lay. So there's no reason to fight it. Just let them lay there, and they've got very good taste. But Marshall certainly is one of the ones that brought Johannes Spittler to light, and he was one of the underbidders on the hanging cupboard when we sold that in 2004, and he wasn't under, but he was the next underbidder. It's so he has had a big hand in Johannes Spittler's story. Probably I would argue that his most important discovery, and one that really kind of caught everybody off guard. I think Roddy Moore had an inkling about it, but Marshall's the one that really put it together, and that's the group of Barb family boxes out of Shenandoah County, back west of Mount Clifton, back between Mount Clifton and Basie or Orkney Springs. There are 11 or 12 of these boxes known. Marshall has 3 of them in this sale, and we've already sold 1 for him. So he had 4 of the 11. These boxes, 7 of them all have descended in families, and they were all descended within 15 miles of where they were made. We are lucky enough to have 2. One that descended in my family, the Harrisons and the Zirkles and the Rosenbergers, that I inherited from my mother. My great grandmother. We had no idea that it was the note inside said this was Gideon Rosenberger's sugar box he brought from Germany. So most of these types of boxes, these band boxes that you see decorated in the United States, are from overseas, Germany, Switzerland, Norway. There's very few. I would say maybe 5% of the decorated band boxes that are out there are actually made in the U.S., made in the United States. Marshall started recognizing this group because he recognized that they were turning up, around here. The first one that was published was the one at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It was in the Titus Giese collection, and that went into the collection at the PMA back in the 20s. And of course, Titus Giese had bought it from Joe Kindig, who had bought it in the Shenandoah Valley. But because it was in Giese's collection, it was cataloged as being Pennsylvania. Abby Aldridge got the second one that was published, and that was out of the Heinbeck sale in Pennsylvania. No collection history with that one, unfortunately, but that ended up at Abby Aldridge at Colonial Williamsburg, and it was cataloged as Pennsylvania based on the PMA attribution. Then and I don't know which order all of these are in, but Marshall turned up the one on the bottom left at the Philadelphia show. He bought that from Don Walters, and it had passed through a couple of different collections by the time Don had gotten it. So unfortunately, there wasn't any collection history with that one. But it is the only one of the boxes or the chest. There's 2 chests associated with this group too, also made by the Barbs, and or at least decorated by them. And this is the only one with figures on it. And so this is a very important box. It's the largest size box made. There's only 2 of this large size. We've got the other large size, which actually we bought from Marshall and Millie McGee, which had also come out of an auction in Pennsylvania many years ago. And both of those have the dark green background on them. The box in the top left, that's the one that Marshall bought at the Lachlan sale in Newmarket of the Buell property, and the Buells had it had come down through the senior moment, Beauchamp family in Newmarket, who had the house on the battlefield. Well, all that was left to the Buells, and when the Buells had a sale, this box was in that sale. And it was an on-site sale at the Buell house on Smith Creek Road, just east of Newmarket, between Newmarket and the mountain there. And we were doing a show in Pennsylvania back then, and I stopped by the auction on Thursday to preview early and looked around. There were some interesting things, but I didn't see anything wonderful. And so I'm in Pennsylvania Saturday morning at a show, and Marshall calls me, and he goes, "Where are you at?" I said, "I'm in Pennsylvania." He said, "Good." I said, "Oh, great." I said, "Where are you at?" He said, "Newmarket." I said, "What the hell's there?" He said, "I'm not going to tell you." I said, "Marshall, I won't call anybody." He said, "One of those boxes." I said, "Damn." He said, "You won't believe it. It looks like it's brand new." And everybody that day at the sale thought that it was brand new. and he got it at a very, very reasonable price. And it is the best condition by far, far, far away of all of those boxes. Not the most exciting of the decoration, but this really gives you an idea of what those boxes looked like new. They were just spectacular. So, so that's my story with that one. The one in the middle, that one, that's the small one that we have out here, the third one that's in this sale. And that one descended down through the Fultz family on Swover Creek there in Edinburgh, just west of Edinburgh. And it's off of Stony Creek. Swover runs off of Stony Creek, and Swover Road runs back there. And the old Fultz homestead was back there, and they had a still, which the still is at the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley now. They had a wonderful house of things that, including just a fabulous, huge walnut Dutch cupboard that had never been moved away from the wall. When I went to look at this stuff, we moved that out from the wall. It had been painted up. The wall had been painted up to that, and the wall behind it was never painted. That's at the Museum of Shenandoah Valley also. They also had some Proctor, some rewards and merits in Proctor by a school teacher down there, which his name just went away from me. James Wilson, thank you. James Wilson. Largest collection of James Wilson pieces anywhere. He's very, very rare pieces with birds and things on them. They've got those also. What happened is they called some auctioneers in, they called us in, they called Laughlin's in, and to give them estimates on things. And Sumter pretty got wind of it, and Sumter went in. He called him, and he went in, and he made him an offer on the stuff at the time that neither I nor Hoyle could say, yes, we can get you more than that. It was an extremely aggressive offer for wonderful things. So Sumter sold the cupboard, and then the people he sold the cupboard to then sold it back to him, and that's how it got to MSV. Sumter didn't recognize the box because nobody recognizes boxes at that time. So he had the box for sale. Marshall got wind of the box, and Sumter sent him photos, and Marshall went right down and grabbed the box. The Proctor, the Wilson pieces also had gone with the cupboard, and MSV got those back. There was also one of those New Market coffee grinders in this group with the copper hoppers, wonderful coffee grinders, which I've not been able to track down. And there were a couple absolutely fabulous butter prints, which I do not know where those got to. But the rest of it kind of got scattered to the wind. And then Laughlin's had a sale of what was left over, and it was still some great stuff that was left over. So it was just it was a wonderful estate of things that Marshall got one of the best things out of. So if you haven't had a chance to look at this group, what is the signature of the group is how they are attached, how they're joined. They're lapped boxes, they lap over, and everything in this group is held together with heavy wire staples that go through the wood on the outside and are clinched on the inside. And there are no other boxes that I know of in America or in Europe that are actually joined in that manner. That is, as far as I know, is unique. Obviously, the decoration is all related, also closely related, and even on the blanket chest there, the decoration is closely related. But the staples joining is what is the key to that group. Just a hugely important group, which actually I am working on an article now on, and hopefully I'll get that published in the next year or two and be able to have all the known examples illustrated. So if you want one of these, you better get it before the prices go up. Another group that Marshall was instrumental in identifying and recognizing is the Steyerwalt group out of New Market, and this group is held together by the stenciled decorations. Steyerwalts were not doing the building. They were probably not even doing, I don't think they were even doing the decorating. They were just, I believe, especially the small boxes. And again, I'm going to be writing more extensively on these also. I believe the small boxes are being stenciled at the girls' school where Steyerwalt was working, had a position there. The larger boxes, I think, are not coming out of the same group. I think they're coming out probably maybe down a little more towards Strasburg. Same school, because some of the same stencils are showing up. So they're tightly related, but but just a little bit different compositions and things on the larger boxes. But I guess there's probably 35 or so of these known now, and I would say Marshall has owned. We've already sold a couple for him, and he's got 3 here. I would say he's probably owned at least 10 over the years. He was really, and he also obviously contributed to the article that Roddy Moore did on these in Magazine Antiques. So where a lot of these were illustrated, include all of his were illustrated. So really another greatly important group there that Marshall was instrumental on identifying. And then a group that really has not been published yet. We published one of these in the McKinney auction. The one on the top right was in the McKinney collection. And again, I'm working on an major article on this group. I've named this group the Starflower and Column group, and it is the decoration is based or is closely related. I mean, there's no doubt. Whoever's doing this decoration is coming right out of Berks County, Pennsylvania. There are similar decorated chests up there. Ours all have 6 petals on the flowers. Theirs all have 5. The columns are a little bit different. The arches on the top are a little bit different, but the basic composition is the same. A lot of the ones in our groups have coggled decoration. You see the McKinney chest there. You can't really make it up, but coggled decoration going up and down. So and all of these, none of ours have waste molding, where all the Pennsylvanians have waste molding. So just a couple of little things that. But the first one of these that turned up that was really recognized is there on the left. And that was at the Headley sale in Winchester. It had come out of the Kern family, and in Kernstown, and it had a lot of history in that family. I think there's more to the provenance than has been talked about at this point, because I think it came into the Kearns family from another family in Shenandoah County. And Frederick County is just north of the next county north, so it's not like it was very far away. But this chest came up at Headley's, and Marshall and Bobby were there and bought it for, there you go, $43,000, which back in the 90s was a lot of money for a chest that nobody knew really where it was from for sure. But it's got a soldier there in the middle, and I would say it's not in the greatest of condition, but it's a hugely important chest, and it is what I believe is the earliest of that group. There's 7 of these chests known, and so Marshall was really instrumental in finding, really recognizing the first one, and then so then the one on the bottom right, that was out of Benny Long's collection. That was in his Bedrooms of America collection, and we ended up with that one. Benny had sold it and to Kelly Kinsel, and we bought it from Kelly Kinsel later. But the other one that Marshall is associated with is the one on the bottom left there. And notice that one doesn't have any feet, never had feet. Notice there's no bails on the drawers, never had brasses, never had locks, and it survives in almost mint condition. The chest on the right, that one originally did not have feet. So you can tell when things go through dealers' hands, they don't look at it like, wow, this never had feet. They look at it like, oh God, I got to put feet on this. I got to put brasses. Nobody's going to want a chest without brasses. So the one on the left turned up at Skinner's back about 8 years ago, and it was actually illustrated in their ads. They had first called it Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania people looked at it and said, no, that's not the Berks County group. That's different. So they changed it to New England, and then of course the New England people said, well, that's not us. And I'll give them total credit, because the only place at this point that this chest had been published was in our McKinney catalog from 1994, I think, something like that. So that, I mean, unless they had a copy of that, they would not know anything about that chest. So I went up and looked at it and opened up the drawers, and it's signed by the Keller family, and they were one of the first settlers of that area of Shenandoah County, back west of Mount Jackson. So This one came directly down through the Keller family, and somehow he ended up in Connecticut, ended up in Massachusetts. It was consigned by somebody there in Massachusetts. Obviously, it stayed in the family at some point. I've not been able to trace it, but back to Marshall. So this was the sale was on a I think Friday or Saturday or whatever. So I waited to call him to Wednesday. Call him and say, "Hey Marshall, how you going?" We had a little small talk. I said, "You bidding on anything this weekend?" He said, "Yep." I said, "Is it in New England?" He said, "Yep." I said, "Does it have feet?" He says, "Nope." I said, "Well, shit." So I said, "Well, you want to partner with it?" He said, "I'm bidding on it." I said, "Okay." Well, we got it for I think $7,000, and I ended up with it. And of course, there was some money to be made there. And so that's in our house too. So now, and then we bought the one down at Laughlin's last year. So the one with George Washington in it, which actually has the Proctor in it for the girl that came down from Berks County, Pennsylvania. And I think whoever brought her down was the artist for this group. But I'm still working on that. But anyway, so that's that. So here's another important group. That Marshall was all over, just absolutely all over, because he could recognize things that didn't fit. So he would look at, because so many things in the valley. People had said, "Oh, well, that's Pennsylvania." Well, it was brought from Pennsylvania when the settlers came, and some of it was, sure. But there were artisans here. Artisans were traveling with them, building these things when they got here. So they they had a Conestoga wagon if they were lucky. They couldn't take all this stuff with them. So Marshall has that eye to be able to recognize differences about things and regional things, and notice the waist molding, and just notice all of those things. And obviously you can look around at his collection with all the different fine art and the Martin Lewises and all these other areas which he just has that eye for, and all this stuff comes together, and it all looks so good together, and that's just something that Marshall could pull off. Of course, Marshall always showed up at the Colonial Williamsburg Antiques Forum. Here he is. This is one of my favorite photos of Marshall and Beverly. This was outside of, I think this was at, it was a barbecue. Okay, it was outside the barbecue. Before we started hosting the barbecue, this was outside the barbecue. And what I loved about Marshall is I think he said the last time that he actually paid to go to the Antiques Forum was 2006, but he had plenty of tags, and he would have his tag on, and just wherever he wanted to go, he'd walk on in. And Beverly was standing with him one time, and Ron Hurst walked up, and Marshall turned his tag around so he couldn't see that it was 10 years out of date. And Marshall said, "I'm with her." And there was another time when I did the chair talk. I was standing up there with Marshall before doing the chair presentation before I started, and Ron or somebody walked up, and Marshall just turned his badge around and just kept on talking, and just nothing. But of course, nobody said anything ever, because Marshall had sold them so much stuff. You go through their collection, and it's like, purchase from Marshall Goodman, purchase from Marshall Goodman, hundreds and hundreds of things. Same way with Mazda. So many things at Mazda have Marshall's fingerprints on them. A lot of things at the Virginia Historical Society, and many, many other places have Marshall's name associated with them. Some as sales, some as gifts. He would find really cool, important things that that he thought needed to be at a place, and sometimes he didn't have everything in it. He'd just give it to them. I'm going through papers back there now with donations and stuff, and we would not know nearly what we know now if it wasn't for Marshall Goodman. And of course, he had the shop on Cary Street, and if anybody ever went there, it wasn't open most of the time. And like Drob said, if it was open, nothing good was for sale. And whenever we went, Marshall would just have some junk sitting in the window, And I said, "Marshall, why don't you put some good stuff in it?" He goes, "Because I ain't selling it, and I don't want anybody breaking in and stealing it." And so this is a photo in his shop. That's the front window with the proverbial valuable cradle. And some really crappy Limoges china sitting there, because he didn't want anybody to know he had anything good in there. He didn't want somebody breaking in and stealing stuff. And I've been there several times when he would see somebody look in the window and it wasn't somebody he wanted to talk to. He'd run up and take the open sign and turn it around to close, and just come back and sit down and keep talking, and say a few choice words which I can't repeat here. But Marshall, it's been a great ride. You are such an important part of what we know and what we love. And my hat's off to you, buddy. Thank you. Okay, we've got some light refreshments out there. Please come out and help yourself, and just mingle and talk amongst yourself. Tell Marshall stories, please, and we'll just have a little bit of good evening yet. What's this? What am I doing?
Click on it. Stop recording.
Stop recording. Whoops, hang on. Where's that?